There's a corrosive shift happening in our society. It's in the government, the boardrooms, the classrooms, and even in the way we interact with one another. It's the slow, creeping death of accountability. The simple foundational principle that actions have consequences and that someone, somewhere, needs to take responsibility for them is gone. Today, the buck stops nowhere. This isn't about a single policy or one shitty leader. It's a cultural pandemic of blame shifting, finger pointing, and a strategic ambiguity that is hollowing out the institutions we depend on. Let's start with the most glaring example, the United States government. An entity created for the sole purpose of serving and protecting its citizens has become a labyrinth of diffused responsibility. Accountability has been replaced by political theater, and the star of that show is aptly a reality television ringleader. When a crisis hits, the playbook is predictable. The party in power blames the previous administration. Agencies point fingers at each other, citing jurisdictional limitations. Leaders deliver carefully crafted statements that never admit fault. The goal is no longer to solve the problem, but to deflect the news cycle and avoid any personal or political cost. Evaded taxes or committed bank fraud? Well, if you're an average Joe, that is a serious offense. But if you and your wife hosted a reality show that celebrates being a horrible parent, and of course you pretend to be Republican, then you and your complicit wife walk away with a full presidential pardon. Oh, and let's not forget the poster children for getting away with it, the Sackler family and their little cash cow, Purdue Pharma. These marketing geniuses took a powerful opioid, OxyContin, and whoops, just so happened to aggressively downplay how wildly addictive it was. The result? Only a devastating public health crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. A minor detail, surely. Not a single criminal charge for the whole family. Instead, they masterminded a brilliant bankruptcy deal where they magnanimously agreed to part with a few $1 billion from their much, much larger opioid fortune to help fix the apocalyptic mess they fueled. The real prize? In exchange for this pocket change, they bought themselves a shiny, custom-made legal shield, protecting them from ever being sued over it again. Remember the 2008 financial crisis? That little oopsie-daisy when Wall Street decided to drive the global economy off a cliff? Well, let's talk about that bullshit. A bunch of brilliant bankers cooked up the genius idea to bundle steaming piles of junk mortgages into complex financial derivatives, which is a fancy term for a ticking time bomb, and then sell them to the entire world. When that house of cards inevitably collapsed, vaporizing trillions of dollars and wrecking the lives of millions of normal people, you'd think there would be some kind of reckoning for the masterminds behind it all. You would be wrong. Guess how many high-level executives from the major banks that caused the meltdown faced criminal prosecution for their role? A big, fat zero. I mean, come on. These folks knew exactly what they were doing. We were fed a buffet of pathetic excuses. It was supposedly too difficult to prove criminal intent. As if they had no idea that selling garbage debt as gold was a bad idea. Responsibility was diffused, a magical corporate force field that makes sure no actual human is ever to blame. The best one, though, was that these banks were too big to fail, which was code for too big to jail. We couldn't possibly prosecute the arsonists because it might destabilize the smoldering ruins of the building they just burned down. So they all walked with bailouts that we paid for. And with those bailouts, many got multi-million-dollar bonuses. The U.S. government shoveled mountains of taxpayer money at the very institutions that caused the disaster, while the banks eventually paid some fines that amounted to little more than couch cushion money for them. A routine cost of doing business. This whole episode wasn't just a failure of justice. It was a brazen confirmation that if you're rich and powerful enough, you can wreck the world and not only get away with it, but get re-ready for it. What the fuck is that all about? Where is the accountability in that? Are you beginning to see the problem yet? It's no wonder the public is deeply cynical when no one is held accountable for failures in infrastructure, healthcare, or public safety, trust evaporates. We are left with a system where promises are cheap because the penalty for breaking them is non-existent. The social contract phrase when leadership is no longer held to its terms. You might be shaking your head like, who gives a fuck? I can already hear the douchebags shouting, whatever. It's not my problem, my 401k is kicking ass, and I'm totally insulated. Wrong. Here's how your brilliant shits the bed along with your entire useless life in a heartbeat.
Oops! So sorry about that pesky almond that slipped into your 6-year-old kid's nut-free cereal and put her into anaphylactic shock. How about a couple grand and a shitty vacay and we call it even?
Welp, we've cut back on human food pickers and quality control, and just one single poisonous mushroom somehow slipped into your spaghetti sauce. So sorry we took your wife out of the gene pool. But look at the bright side. You'll never have to hear her complain about anything again. We'll send thoughts and prayers. Hey there, those pesky lithium-ion batteries, am I right? We're not sure how your phone overheated and exploded while you were driving, causing those horrible permanent scars on your face, or how your tires blew out on the highway resulting in you careening into a tree. That wheelchair is bumpin'. Sorry about the paralysis, bro, but it's not our fault you're cheap. We were forced to cut costs on materials. Buy another brand next time if you want.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Smith, a 200% interest rate on your credit card is normal these days. It's in the credit agreement you didn't read when you applied for this card. And if your payment is late, will completely destroy your life. Have a nice day.
Sure, maybe in some cases you can call Morgan & Morgan and get a fat check in a few months. But is sacrificing the health or even the life of yourself or a loved one really worth the payoff? Accountability is the guardrail that is supposed to prevent things like this from happening. Accidents are supposed to lead to lesson-learning lawsuits and a painful loss of profits. But if the government allows these things to go unpunished, and if corporate conglomerates decide to buy the press and not report about these mishaps, companies will become even more irresponsible. And that affects all of us, even you. So, the biggest joke was what happened at the CFPB. After a leadership change, the agency flip-flopped its main purpose to protecting corporations from consumers. What the fuck? Its whole let's enforce the rules vibe was promptly tossed out and replaced with a much cozier, yeah, let's help our buddies in the financial industry. Remember that pesky rule that tried to stop credit card companies from completely gouging you with insane late fees? Gone. The industry cried that reining them in would be too hard, and the administration nodded along sympathetically. A real tragedy for their bottom line, I'm sure. Protections against shady debt collection tactics were also weakened. It was a great time to be in the business of harassing people for money they might not even owe. Thank God for call blockers. And those delightful overdraft fees that banks just love. Protections against those were shown the door, too. Because God forbid a bank couldn't hit you with a $35 fee for a mistimed cup of coffee. That's just smart business, right? Got sick? Crushing medical debt? Fantastic. This administration worked hard to make sure that debt could haunt your credit report forever, making it even harder to get back on your feet. So thoughtful. And who needs privacy, am I right? In the digital age, your personal financial information is a gold mine. Companies are paying upwards of $30 for one single verified email address. Rules that would have put a leash on data brokers, digital wallets, and big tech payment apps were axed. Why give you control over how your financial data is bought and sold when it's so profitable for them? Beyond gutting specific rules, the entire philosophy changed. The CFPB basically went from being a consumer watchdog to a bitchy lapdog. Enforcement actions plummeted, and the message to big corporations was loud and clear. The coast is clear, do whatever the fuck you want. Of course, wealthy policy cheerleaders on both sides of the aisle will tell you this was all about cutting job-killing red tape and creating a business-friendly environment, which, is a fantastic way to spin letting companies run wild while you get to deal with the consequences. Nancy Pelosi's portfolio certainly isn't hurting. The language of modern business is designed to obscure responsibility. We don't have layoffs, we have right-sizing. We don't have failures, we have pivots. This bullshit jargon creates a buffer between decisions and their very real human consequences. The focus on short-term quarterly gains over long-term stability and ethical conduct means that by the time the long-term consequences arrive, the leaders who made the decisions are long gone, their pockets lined. This isn't leadership. It's a high-stakes game of pass the parcel, and the employees and consumers are the ones left holding the bag when the music stops. In our schools, the pressure for metrics has created a system where accountability is skewed. When standardized test scores become the ultimate measure of success, teachers and administrators are incentivized to teach to the test rather than fostering critical thinking, creativity, and genuine understanding. We are graduating students who know how to fill in a bubble, but lack the skills to navigate a complex world. A failure for which no one seems to be accountable. This erosion of accountability inevitably seeps into our personal lives. We see it in the rise of ghosting, where relationships are ended with silence, avoiding the difficult but necessary conversation. We see it in the non-apology apology, with passive-aggressive phrases like, "I'm sorry if you were offended," which places the burden of injury on the person who was harmed. When our leaders in every major sector modeled the behavior of deflecting and evading, it normalizes this conduct for everyone. It teaches us that owning our mistakes is for, well, suckers. It suggests that the clever thing to do is to find an angle and shift the blame. The only thing that seems to be receiving increased accountability these days is everything that has anything to do with sex crimes. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but what's not fair is trial by media. You're found guilty by the world when your arrest story tops the evening news, often years before you even have a trial date. Potentially innocent men and women are being pre-punished for crimes that may never be convicted of. But of course, if you're super wealthy and on Jeff Epstein's secret list and probably committed the same exact sex crimes, your records are sealed and you get a magic pass. Come on. You've got to admit this is bad. It's a shitstorm in the making. The connection between responsibility and function is not just a philosophical concept, it's a practical one. Accountability is the bedrock of trust, and trust is the currency of any functioning society. Without it, everything falls apart. Like everything else, it's all about T and A. No, not that T and A, you fucking perv. The relationship can be expressed with a simple, powerful formula. Trust equals accountability. To reverse this trend, we've got to stop accepting excuses. We have to demand clear answers and hold leaders' feet to the fire, at the ballot box, with our wallets, and in our communities. We must reject the notion that complex problems are an excuse for a total lack of ownership. And it starts with us. In our own lives, we can choose to be the kind of people who own our actions, admit our mistakes, and accept the consequences. We can model the integrity we wish to see from our leaders. Rebuilding a culture of accountability is a monumental task, but it begins with one simple, powerful act: taking responsibility. Sadly, any mechanism to reverse what's already happened will need to be codified in law, and it would literally take an act of Congress to do that, probably in the form of a constitutional amendment, and we haven't passed one of those bad boys in years. Why? Because the system works for the oligarchs. They bastardize the current Constitution perfectly and stack the Supreme Court to keep it that way. Here's how we can fix it. To install genuine accountability, you'd need to embed principles that close loopholes and make responsibility direct and unavoidable. Here are key principles that would be necessary. 1. Mandated transparency. Accountability is impossible without information. The government's default setting should be openness, not secrecy. Right to information. The Constitution would codify a citizen's right to access all government data, spending, communications, voting records, and meeting logs in real time and in easily searchable formats. Strict secrecy limits. The power to classify information would be severely restricted to immediate and verifiable threats to national security, with automatic declassification deadlines. End qualified immunity. The principle of qualified immunity for public officials would be explicitly abolished, making government agents personally liable for actions that violate constitutional rights. 2. Binding term limits. Public service should be a temporary tour of duty, not a permanent career, to prevent the consolidation of power and insulate officials from the citizens they represent. Universal limits. Hard term limits would apply to all federal positions. This includes Congress. The judiciary, a single, non-renewable 18-year term for Supreme Court and appellate judges, and senior-level bureaucrats. Revolving door ban. A constitutionally mandated ban would prevent former officials from lobbying or working for any industry they regulated for a significant period, such as 10 years, after leaving office. 3. Direct citizen oversight and consequence. There must be clear non-political mechanisms for citizens to enforce consequences for failure and misconduct. This could replace jury duty. National recall provision. A constitutional process would allow citizens to initiate a recall election for any federally elected official upon reaching a certain petition threshold. This moves accountability from being a once-every-few-years event to a rolling standard. Sunset clauses. All federal programs and agencies would be created with a mandatory sunset clause, like 7 to 10 years. To continue existing, the agency would have to be explicitly reauthorized by Congress after a thorough public performance audit. This forces a regular evaluation of whether a program actually works and incentivizes employees and bureaucrats to work harder. Independent Ethics Commission. An independent, randomly chosen, citizen-based, constitutionally enshrined council, firewalled from political and/or corporate influence, would have the power to investigate and prosecute corruption, waste, and ethical breaches in all 3 branches of government. 4. Inescapable fiscal responsibility. Unchecked spending and debt are primary drivers of unaccountable governance, allowing politicians to make promises without considering the long-term cost. All bills making appropriations shall be limited to a single and clearly expressed subject. Any provision within such a bill that does not relate directly to the single subject expressed in its title shall be null and void. Balanced budget mandate. The Constitution would require the federal budget to be balanced. Any deficit spending would require a supermajority vote in both houses of Congress and could only be authorized for a declared national emergency. Of course, we'll need to specifically redefine national emergency, so some reality show ninny can't simply declare a national emergency because he wants to golf in Scotland. Pay-as-you-go principle. All new legislation proposing spending must constitutionally identify its own funding source, either through a corresponding spending cut elsewhere or a specific tax increase. This directly links new promises to their costs. Yeah, it'll never happen. We'll continue to run off the rails until the wrong person gets hurt, or people get so fed up that Alex Garland's Civil War film becomes reality. What's funny is they actually use Canadian currency instead of American dollars to buy gasoline in that film. The irony abounds. Do you have any ideas how to resolve this crisis? Let us know. Maybe we can fix this sputtering, formerly great nation together before it's too late.